Great. So we've started our recording. Thank you all for joining today's session. We are in the third or the fourth session for the Centering SDGs discussion. And this is mainly led by our youth and our young people who have all these amazing ideas. And here we are discussing advocacy and the role of SDGs here with a fantastic panel. So I'll ask our panelists to go ahead with the discussion and also introduce themselves, please. Sophia?
Yeah, so firstly, hi everyone, and thank you for joining. I'm Sophia, and today we'll be focusing on PFD skills, which is a type of debate, public forum debate, on how we can equip ourselves to be decision makers in not just policy, but in everyday conversations. While it may feel daunting, we're here to break it down for you. So I'm currently a senior in high school and a public forum debate head in my school's debate team. Today, I'm also joined with Sydney and Chris.
Hello, I'm Sydney. I'm also a senior at Lower Moreland High School, and I am Sophia's partner in PFD.
Yeah, I'm Chris. I think I know all of y'all. And I go to a boarding school in New Hampshire called Phillips Exeter. I'm a sophomore in high school right now, and I'm really excited to join both of these great people. So we can hop right in.
So for this workshop, we're going to be presenting a couple different things to you. First, we'll be introducing what public forum debate actually is. Then we'll be showing you some tips for how to win debates and how to structure your arguments for that. Then we'll be showing you what skills you'll be gaining by debating and how these skills apply to the SDGs, and furthermore, how to structure an argument together using the 3 principles of debate.
So first of all, we just want to get like a survey of you guys. So if you guys want to answer in the chat or like explain to us, like what's the first thing, what comes to mind when you hear or you think about like debate in general. It might be like an emotional thing, or maybe you like it, or like what are your like first impressions of it. So yeah, you guys can drop it in the chat, or if you want you can just say it aloud. So yeah, go ahead either way.
And maybe as panelists, we can talk about even some of our initial interactions with debate or types of it. Believe it or not, you all probably have in some way debated in some capacity, whether it just be in casual conversation on why chocolate ice cream is better than vanilla, or maybe just the research you do when preparing for an assignment. These are both critical things you do in debate. So just feel free to put that in the chat. Maybe some things you think of debate, what you think it is, what it involves, skills. Yeah, so you're definitely going to be presenting an argument on a topic. Yes, so debate will definitely have 2 different viewpoints, which we'll discuss further, and that will be pro versus con. Organizing your arguments and doing it so effectively will be really critical. Yes, so I actually like that this person pointed it out. Tanner had pointed out how a debate to me is an argument between 2 people about whether something is right or wrong, but in a nice manner. When you do public forum debate, it is a school competition, and you will be judged by a neutral party, which is your judge. And so it will be taken into accountability, the respectfulness in the conversation. So that's definitely something to keep in mind, is the etiquette that goes on in debate too.
Someone private messaged me, and they were mentioning how they were it's more than, or sometimes it's more than 2 or more people, and I think that's a great thing about the collaborative nature of PFD, because from like previous experiences, I know that some of these debates are like 2 people, some of them are like teams, so you get to work with other people, and it's not just like head on head, if that makes sense. So yeah, I think like that's what makes it enjoyable, in comparison to more of like a very stressful competitive nature.
And as Radhika has said, debate has facts that's super important to your argument, or else you're probably making an assertion that your opponent will point out in your rebuttal. So those are definitely things we're going to address in today's session. So without further ado, Chris, let's move to the
next part.
next slide. So yeah, these are definitely normal things to expect in debate. I remember being enthralled when I was a sophomore in high school, just at the idea of trying out. I remember joining a novice workshop and the upperclassmen just effortlessly debated, recalling research left and right, and just always having a rebuttal at hand. They were experts on their topics, but you guys too can be experts and engage confidently and meaningfully in everything from policy discussions to just your everyday conversations about issues you care about, like the SDGs, which is why we'll be breaking down the ins and outs of public forum debate today. So PFD is short for public forum debate and is where two opposing teams of two will advocate or reject a position posed by a monthly topic, otherwise known as the resolutions. Resolutions reflect current events and advocate solving a problem by establishing a position, which, as you guys had mentioned in chat, will be either pro or con, or what you'll often hear as referenced as the affirmative and negative parts of speech. When in debate, you might think you're upholding a side you believe in, but that's not necessarily the case when you're in a school competition for debate. In one round, you might be affirming the resolution for pro, and in the next, you could be negating it. This concept actually has a name, and it's called switch side debating. You have to be prepared to represent both pro and con. Usually in a debate tournament, you'll have to do at least 3 different rounds. So you'll most likely be doing either 2 con rounds, 1 pro, or 2 pro and 1 con, and it's always randomized. This is probably one of just the most challenging things to do, and it really requires one to really thoroughly understand their arguments, which is done through structuring your arguments well and also doing a lot of research. So if it helps you with anything, it really just always gets you thinking about how you can use this for advocacy for the SDGs, because something important is we might always be putting forth what we may believe, but when you're in a debate tournament and you're in a room with a judge, you have to be ready for someone who's going to challenge your arguments and to be ready to defend them on the floor in a crossfire. So you're definitely being put on the spot. So Sydney, do you want to go over the structure now?
Yes, on the next slide here, you'll see the standard speech order with the limits on the right-hand side. And each round lasts about 40 minutes, so this all adds up to 40, but it's broken down into each of these different parts, so it might seem like it goes much faster than you think it will. So you'll see in the parentheses here, there's speakers 1 and 2 for each team. And this is important because each speaker has a different role here. Speaker 1 gives the first speeches here, the opening constructives. And these sort of set up the debate, presenting evidence and lines of reasoning. And speaker 2 will bounce off of that and, rebut those arguments and recall their opposition's arguments on the spot. So because I'm speaker 1, I'll be breaking down how to successfully debate in this opening constructive speeches.
And respectively, as speaker 2 of our debate team between Sydney and I'll lay out how to effectively rebuttal and give a final focus. Both speakers, speaker 1s and speaker 2s, will participate in crossfires. So we'll also review that, but certainly something you can gain from this structure is how in such a short amount of time, you certainly have a lot of things to convey. So you have to think 10 times faster, which means you really have to know your supporting evidence so you can thoroughly back up your arguments in these speeches. In these speeches, connecting the dots between your points will mostly be on how much you researched. While you might have, even though you may have researched both pro and con, you do not know what the 3 main arguments or 3 to 4 main arguments your opponents are going to lay out before you. And so something you'll always be doing in debate is you'll always be taking notes. Listening is critical. So we'll also talk about how we can be more effective in the things we pick up in rebuttals and speaking towards our opponent's points. Next slide.
Okay, so for the opening constructives, the first speakers from each team will give a brief introduction to their case, and they'll sort of define the terms, any important terms that come up in the resolution of the debate. So they'll present typically 3 contentions, each of which represents a separate argument that supports their view on the resolution. And they'll add some evidence in there to support these contentions. So speaker one, typically speaker one should conclude with a summary of the contentions covered. And typically this speech is prepared in advance, so it'll probably be scripted. And pro always goes first, then con. So an underlying concept will always be the risk of change versus the risk of not changing. So if you're pro, you're going to be advocating for changing the status quo. Whereas if you're arguing con, then you'll be arguing to, stay as it is right now. And while your opponent is speaking, it's always definitely important to be taking notes during their speeches. So you can sort of take their arguments and turn them around, flip them so that you can rebut them and prove that your own points are more worthy than theirs during the crossfire. Next slide.
So the second speakers of the respective teams then have the responsibility of refuting the other team's contentions by analyzing and explaining faults they found just when listening to the opening speeches and the first crossfires. These speeches are not prepared in advance. These will all be picked up based off what you write, connecting it to the evidence you have that you laid out in the earlier contentions. And what a successful rebuttal will do is that it'll try to reduce the opponent's position by looking at different causes that might not be accounted for, but that your argument addresses. And sometimes if you find inconsistencies in their statements, you could point that out. At the end of any rebuttal, time should always be allocated to rebuild your case, because this is going to be a time where both sides are going to definitely be challenging each other's points. And just like the first speakers, the second speakers will face each other in a crossfire. So then the debate returns the first speakers providing a summary. So Sydney will provide insight into that next.
Right, so as Sophia said, in addition to the constructive speeches and the rebuttals, there are summary speeches after the crossfires. And these summary speeches, there's a lot of information that you have to compile together and convey in just 2 minutes. You have to explain why you think your side is winning, while also refuting your opponent's arguments, and you have to sum all that in 2 minutes. And so what's different about the summary is that you are not making any new arguments. You are simply touching on the arguments that were made beforehand in the debate and either refuting them or supporting them. And it's important that you do not make any new arguments, because this can get you disqualified in a competition.
And so after the summary, all debaters will now engage in a grand crossfire. So all speaker ones, all speaker two, everyone from each team will participate in this. And then the speaker twos will give a final focus. While pro, as we stated, starts the debate, now con will have the final impression because they are the last to speak. And again, no new arguments can be made. You can bring in new evidence, but no new arguments can be made in this part of the debate. You want to focus really just on the most important arguments you are winning, summarize your evidence, and make sure to defend any of your contentions your opponents may have challenged. Something you should also know is that there's something called prep time in a debate. which is when teams are allocated a total of 2 minutes for the entirety of the debate to talk with your partner. You can take prep time only in between speeches. You can't just say pause in between a middle of a crossfire to talk with your partner and to discuss or find evidence on the spot. That's something you have to be prepared and ready to do. But that's something great about the current crossfire is you and your partner can really work together to each other's strengths because both of you will be speaking, and one may be if you beforehand plan who can focus on one point or the other, then you guys can have definitely a goal going into it. And so if there is strategy to taking prep time, as we had said, con will go last. So if no one used prep time by the end of the debate and you're at your final focus, pro gave their final focus, there's one more speech left, then con, before they give it, should take any remaining time for prep and speak with their partner to go over anything that maybe they weren't thinking they were going to bring up, to just catch up and review so they can create overall a stronger final focus. So while it may seem like a lot of strategy will come beforehand in the research and how you present your arguments, once you're on the spot, you're really bringing everything that you did before onto the table. But you can also just think about how you allocate these 2 minutes will be super important. So next, we'll be talking about the skills, I believe. Yeah, so debate translates into real world skills. And this is a huge part of our workshop today because understanding the SDGs, there's a lot of intersectionality between them. And so you're definitely going to be taking on different perspectives. And it's really just important to understand where someone is coming from. If we want to, find ways to propose solutions or to, find ways to get along, it's not a clean slate where it's going to be a perfect pro or perfect con. You might find in certain resolutions that you're just seeing whether or not the benefits outweigh the negatives. So one of the main arguments you'll make to counter maybe your opponent will be, well, yes, that is certainly a downfall, but it's not as significant as blank. And then you would have to support that with evidence and construct that argument. But to understand where someone is coming from can really help us in the way we think of our solutions. And then Sydney, do you kind of just want to speak on some of those other skills as well?
Right. So I think definitely debating will build your own confidence and help you think on your feet, because I know during the crossfires, these are not scripted at all. As a first speaker, I know my speeches are scripted, but during a crossfire, when you're directly challenging the other opponent's arguments or trying to formulate a response to their questions about yours, you really have to think quickly about your perspective and the evidence that you've presented thus far, and really just try to convey that in a clear and concise manner. And I think that also kind of relates to like the SDGs, because when you're debating, you might not even have thought of like a question that your opponent might have given you. So it really just opens your minds to the other person's shoes and like the other person's perspective, and puts yourself in their shoes. So I think it'll be really important for you to learn these skills so that you can have them for a lifetime.
Yeah, and I'd also just like to add that since you are saying a lot of things, even in short amount of time, to recall the final focus is given in 2 minutes. So you usually don't want to, teams can yield their time because sometimes if you don't have anything to say, it might sound worse if it's just silence. So teams will end up yielding their time. But it's not going to be perfect your first run. Debate topics last for 1 to 2 months. So it's something you build upon. Once you come back from your first competition, you reflect, you think about, okay, we weren't really prepared to answer that contention. We didn't even think of that. So let's prepare, let's add that to our con argument, and let's be able to counter that if we were arguing it in pro. So debate really helps you articulate your thoughts, but also I think it allows you to just, it's really just a learning bend. It's a learning experience. It really teaches you how to listen to others, because some debaters are certainly speaking like 1,000 miles per minute. Sydney and I have definitely been to some of those, and it can quite feel daunting not picking up on everything they're saying. But I just like to point out that quality will always be better than quantity. In the evidence you select, that will be important. So also, I just like to point out with something with debate, you don't have to, the point of debate isn't to disagree with everything, because the last thing you want to do is refute a point that maybe you shouldn't be against, because then your argument, then the opponents could just flip that on you to say, well, aren't you pro? Shouldn't you be following the following resolved, that you should be, affirmative for this or that. So yeah, that's just something important to point out.
So I think Sydney touched a little bit upon this, but I think another thing we wanted to talk about in the chat would be like, how does like understanding the skills of debate, how does that tie into understanding the SDGs? And I think Sydney had highlighted a little bit before, but I think if we talk a little bit or chat a little bit more about that, that would be good.
Can I just say that that was a lot of information, and such effective information that I could never think of. It was so analytically presented that it really made sense to follow through all the tips and get all the logical sequences down. And I will definitely share this recording with a lot of our my Indian students, because I think it adds on to what people know about debating. So wonderful presentation.
Oh, sorry, we didn't mean to unshare our screen. We want to actually open this part to think about maybe in whether that just be in school, in conversations you have, how you think the skills, some of which we just went over, can help build our advocacy for the SDGs. So one example is definitely thinking of different perspectives, and you guys can say in chat why that's important, or you guys could unmute and we can talk about it.
I think one of the things that we talk about is systems thinkers in here, right? Is that what happens when there's unintended consequences? Where do we go from there? Anybody want to pick that up?
Yeah, I'll take it. So after the unintended consequences, we want to think system, we want to think system, not blame, which pretty much means instead of blaming things, we want to think what could be wrong with the certain system and how we can like find a leverage point to stop it.
Yeah, I don't know what you guys thought about this, but when they were explaining that crossfire and probably how you have to listen really closely to other people's arguments, I think that, building on what Marco said, that we should go for structure or the facts of it, right? Rather than like the blame or trying to come through with just emotion. And I think that in itself could help us dig deeper on the SDGs to get off surface level. What do you guys think?
Yeah, we're actually also going to dive into systems thinking later as we present a resolution example for you guys. But this is something I think we always keep in mind. And also to remember that it is, a competition, and not everything that happens in the debate room is something that you should be taking personally. It's really just a time to be thinking about what your opponent is saying. They're not just this enemy. And really, it's just about a learning experience for both, about thinking how there's a pro and con to each issue. Again, you will be arguing both. And I think by switching perspectives when thinking about, solutions, when pro or con is going to refute one another, they're definitely going to look into, well, is that accessible or maybe equitable to someone, depending on what the topic is. That could definitely reduce someone's argument, because they could instead say, well, this is more effective because evidence or research suggests that in previous years, or maybe they'll use other countries where something has been implemented to kind of set a model of where something has been successful. But then again, there's always the common debate that, well, you cannot base that off in that system. So it's definitely going to go back and forth, and you definitely have to be prepared. And Sydney, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think it's really important that just touching back to the part about listening to your opponent's arguments, because I know a lot of times debaters just try to stick to the script and like say what they have prepared, but really listening and honing in on what the other side is saying is what's going to win you debates, and like responding to what they're saying. And I think it's also applicable to like, your real life conversations as well, because a lot of times people just say what they want to say, and they don't really again, think about other people's perspectives. And so that skill of just listening to other people is going to be really important in developing our understanding again of the SDGs.
Yeah, and debate, just like real world issues, are not black and white. And so there's definitely going to be multiple sides to the thing. I would point out one thing that is a little tricky with public forum debate. If someone states something, the opposing side, you find that you want to oppose it, you must say so with supporting evidence, or else it's just going to be held that it is true. If they say the sky is purple, then the sky is purple till someone refutes that point, essentially. So and I just, like, a final thing I'd like to say is probably one of the biggest mistakes is just reading word for word everything you have. If you're stuck in that mindset, by just sticking exactly to your contentions, you really have, debate is about adapting to, especially in crossfires, to what your opponent's going to point out. You don't know what, maybe you didn't research something, but that's why you have to be prepared, and that you might not have everything the first round you debate, but it's definitely important that presenting evidence, as much as we stress that it is important that you find credible evidence, just saying a piece of evidence is not an argument. It needs to be sandwiched with an explanation before, and that explains its impact and relevance to the resolution you're addressing, which is exactly how we definitely want to approach the SDGs, because why are they global goals? What issues do they stem from? And that's a lot of the sub-targets. We actually list 3 important sub-targets that we found kind of relevant to the issue we focused our resolution around. So that'll definitely be good to get into.
Yeah, I was just going to go directly to that. So so I think the skills are really critical to understanding the 17 SDGs that we have on the board here. And I think they're all very interconnected, and understanding like the intersection between the SDGs and debate skills, is that like we can realize that we become more informed change makers and decision makers. And overall, I think it is really helpful to integrate both of them into your daily life, because it's not just in these debate tournaments that you have these skills, but you can use them in the classroom with your peers, at the lunchroom, all over, and all in your lives. So the resolution we decided to work on was the U.S. should retain free school lunches in its federal spending package. So several states are getting rid of their free school lunches after in like a few months, I believe. There's a few states retaining them as well. But we want to just explore this issue, because I think it's pertinent to all of y'all in school, and I think it's germane to whatever you guys are discussing and working on right now specifically. And here on the board, we have some SDGs that we think are like really important. 2.1, which is universal access to safe and nutritious food. So this lies directly in food security and free school lunches. The second one, build knowledge and capacity to meet climate change, is more of like a perspective on how this experience of free lunches shapes us to learn more about climate change and like food audits of that nature. And then lastly, we have food waste and how that is related to free school lunches. And we just want to go over like some of the pros and cons of the resolve. And I think that's like we have like some of the ones that we came up with, but we want to see, since you guys are going to be directly affected by it, and like at least starting by the next school year, like how is that? What are your thoughts on that, I guess, and the pros and cons behind it?
I think, should we have just the pros first, or should we just?
Yeah, we can start with pros. Yeah.
Start with pro. And so pro will take the position that the U.S. should retain free school lunches universally across schools and include that in the package or funding package. And so we'll just give you a moment to kind of think about that. And then we'll see if we can brainstorm any con arguments.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Marcos, surrounding, how free lunches and like food insecurity is tied to directly the people impacted most by it, most notably, people affected by poverty.
And so I think what both of those two both do is they definitely put themselves in someone else's shoes and think about what that experience for someone in a different location, what that might be in the lunchroom. And so those are definitely both great points, and points pro would most definitely argue in their contentions. Should we? Okay, there's more. Yeah, so no, this is really interesting. By giving free lunches, they'll be able to eat healthy because there are regulations and requirements that schools have with their school lunches. And so that actually will be one of the contentions we make. And right now you guys are brainstorming, but what will differentiate the ones we present is we'll try to add further evidence to it, because that's really important. And whenever you're in a debate, to support that. And that's how you open up your constructive. Yes, and definitely something I like that transition. Not just that they'll have access to more nutritional foods, but what's the impact? What's the benefit of something? That's your explanation that's going to come in with your evidence. There's always a structure to debate. It might always seem confusing, like, well, there's this many facts, but I think you definitely have to take time to organize. Okay, I know what this will be a rebuttal to. So kind of how I prepare myself is, well, I know what I have this evidence that what rebuttal I can expect from my opposition. I know I can use it, but you don't want to go in with like, if they ask me this particular thing, that's how I'll rebuttal. That's when you kind of have to adapt and think about something that could maybe the evidence you provide can apply across multiple sectors, definitely. So I think with that said, let's transition to some of the con arguments. And so my advice would be is remember that this is coming out of federal funding. So that's definitely going to be something pointed out by the con argument because the funds have to come from somewhere. So I'll just point out that allocation of resources will always be something in debate mentioned, economics. So we're not always just looking, we're always looking to see maybe social, environmental, economic perspectives when we're talking about it in conversation.
Yeah, just to add on to that, I don't want to generalize, but I'd say generally speaking, like economic like theory can be used as like a negative stance when you're generally like fighting for like some sort of social equity issue, if that makes sense.
And also, it's, as Sophia mentioned, it's a cost from federal funds, and it costs taxpayers around $14.2 billion. And this could go towards other things that the government, more pressing issues that the government may need to respond to.
Yeah, that's definitely, you guys are hitting some of our con arguments already. Yeah, so should we showcase some of our pro and con arguments, Chris, that we came up
Yeah,
with?
we can just hop right in then. Okay.
Yeah, so I can start off with just some of the pro ones. So these aren't, we're going to follow this with how we would structure an argument very clearly and how you would set it up. But these are just, when you're definitely starting with the topic, this is things you should brainstorm. What would be some pros and cons right off the bat? And I will mention some supporting evidence that we went into providing these. So following some regulations that emerged from the Healthy Hunger Free Act, the nutritional quality of school meals improved significantly. So that's definitely something we wanted to mention in the pro. So therefore that leads to improvement of student diet quality. And we wanted to relate that, how that can lead to improved productivity in schools and attendance. Of course, we would back this up with specific research. And also because students no longer have to worry about paying for the meal, it definitely lifts off that stress for paying for a school meal, and the benefits of, having to have a nice, nutritious, healthy food throughout the day is really important. And then also something we'll showcase later in the empathy map and iceberg we have is also how that food access to nutritious food isn't something that
You guys, because if we don't speak up in the recording, it will.
access to something, food is not something, or at least nutritional food is not something of access to everyone, especially in location. And so when we did bring up those sub-targets, while you may not see in the pro argument that we're talking about climate change, we know together, or at least something Chris, Sydney, and I had discussed, is how climate change is a threat multiplier and a lot of problems arise from it. And one of those things can be linked to food insecurity, food waste, the amount of food we produce and where does it go. And, that can be linked to, I know another session upcoming in the next week is about food waste and how that can also be connected to emissions and climate change. So it's definitely multidimensional, these issues. And while we may not be saying that exactly in the pro case, you can make that argument in a moral sense, but that's definitely something that you can look into in the iceberg. Where does it stem from? Where food insecurity, how does that affect different populations? And therefore why free food and lunches would be beneficial to the US population and students and youth.
Yeah, just to tie into all of that, I'm just gonna build a little bit on Sophia's point. So regarding the second one, I remembered reading like a small bit of research that mentioned like that, generally speaking, for most students attending school, that's like their most nutritious meals, and they basically had like different like ratings for different components featured in these meals, but For a lot of students, this is like one of the like nutritious meals of the day. For the second one, if I remember correctly, like the number of students that are like food insecure and they're also ineligible for federal funding is like over 50,000 kids in the state of New Jersey, and the average debt per kid is over $150, which sounds really crazy in my opinion. And as Sophia mentioned, I think using the iceberg and empathy map tools are really helpful. And it's also not just, you know, an issue on paper, but there's also, you know, a stigma surrounding, you know, receiving free meals. You know, I know, I'm not sure exactly at Reddington Middle School, but I know at other schools, you know, sometimes they have like a free meal line versus a regular meal. And oftentimes, you know, kids can be discriminated against because they're in the free meal line. So with that, I think we can hop into the cons. So some of the to start off, cons would be like the negative side, and one of them would be, you know, surrounding economics. Like there's like a lack of change in the menu because when you're on a budget due to federal spending, you know, it's harder to change to more tastier and more nutritious meals. There's also the other argument that money can be used to fund more effective social programs. You can find like a specific example of that and then delineate from there what program you want or you feel would be more effective. And there's also like tax levies in low-income communities. So tax levy, I would describe it as like, besides like the state and federal aid that a school receives, tax levies are like property taxes that like the portion of it that the schools receive and how that's distributed for free meal programs. And specifically on that, you know, in these higher income communities, you know, it's easier to institute these free meal programs, but in the communities affected most by them, the lower income communities, it's often harder to get funding for these kind of programs. And the last one is that distributing free lunches doesn't necessarily solve the root of the food insecurity problem. So, I mean, I think it's rooted, like one part of the root is based in like poverty, and while you are providing a meal, that isn't necessarily tackling, you know, the huge issue. So, yeah, anything to add on?
Nope, I think we should continue so we can have some Q&A time.
Okay, yeah. So there's events, or yeah, there's a systems thinking iceberg, which I think is a great tool, and the empathy map, which I remember using both of these a lot, and I think you can really apply them to a lot of these scenarios. The biggest emphasis we wanted to make was on, you know, how you can develop your arguments for debate, and oftentimes, you know, you have like your base perspective from, you know, how you're seeing it. But if you can use like the empathy map to understand other people, it can help you to further develop and understand your perspective and like develop your argument. But yeah, we could, you know, you can tackle like any like event that you see on the surface. You know, I think we've talked about before, like food waste in the cafeteria and how that's the patterns of it. You see it keep getting thrown away day after day. Underlying structures in place, you know, generally speaking, you know, there's some foods that people pick up just to get a free meal when they don't necessarily want it. And the mental models behind it, you know, you can through that, you know, you can explore the mind of a student, I guess, who is purchasing meals. And then the empathy map is also a really good way to understand different perspectives of people throughout the entire system. So yeah, Sydney and Sophia are just gonna talk about structuring your argument.
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. So we wanted to show you exactly how we would structure this argument with a sample of the exact structure that public forum debate people would use. This is the key to victory in your debate. Sydney, do you want to start us off with this?
Yeah, so the key to structuring an argument is you're going to have 3 different parts to it. And so the first part is your claim. And your claim is basically what you're trying to prove in your argument. What's the main point? What do you want to prove to be true? And the second point, the second part is your warrant. And that's basically your logical justification, your line of reasoning. And within that, you're going to include some data and information as to why your warrant makes sense, why your line of thinking is true, and it's going to support your claim in turn. And the final part is going to be, in addition to research and evidence, you're going to have like different types that you might want to use. So on the right here, you can see you can use statistics, quotations, studies, and polls from reputable sources. And these are all going to bolster your argument. And so the final part is your impact. And that's basically the reason why your argument actually matters. And that's going to be really important into helping your prove your argument, because it's going to basically show how your argument is relevant to some real world issues going on. And so these three elements are going to be critical in establishing a solid argument. So with that said, we're going to introduce our example argument here. And Sophia is going to introduce the claim, warrant, evidence, and impact of these.
So as stated, the following resolved is the U.S. should retain free school lunches in its federal spending package. This takes a pro argument, and you can clearly see that in the claim you make, which is exactly the intent behind it, to establish your purpose or not purpose, but your position behind the argument. So our claim is that retaining free school lunches will lead to improvements in student diet quality. And so something you always want to right off the bat that should be clear to the judge is that it should intuitively resonate with them by using direct language. And when you automatically say improvement, they are going to know that you are pro. And so no audience should be left to wonder, is this positive or negative? They should understand that the resolution accomplishes something good and therefore should be passed. And that was the aim of this claim. So next, we followed up with our warrant, which is going to be something where we state why this claim is true. And most commonly how this is done is you'll say, oh, this is true because, or this is the case because, by using data. And so I would just follow it up. This is true because regulations that emerged from the 2010 Healthy Hunger Free Kids Act have made it so that nutritional quality of school meals have improved significantly. And then you specify that further with saying the largest improvement has been gone, or the percentages with poor diet quality decreasing from 55.6% to 24.4%, according to the exact report you referred to. Something debate partners, or your opponents will put you on the spot for is what is your resource you are referring to. Sometimes they might ask you to provide it for them. So you should always know where your different evidence comes from. And lastly, this is really important, is the reason why the argument should matter to the audience. Without an impact, your argument could seem meaningless to the judge. The speaker may be making a true argument, but you have to make sure that the judge too can assign it value. An impact should establish specific and tangible benefits. And a lot of the time, like we were saying, the best impact involves people. So that's why ours talks about how food insecurity is a growing concern. And by having free lunches, school lunches will be able to reduce school meal debt and increase access to nutritional food, supporting kids to perform at their best. And so that is going to be the main way you structure every single argument. It's going to be the way you think about your rebuttals, the way you always think about your responses, always setting up a claim, reaffirming your statements, backing that up with evidence, and always establishing a clear direction to what that impact is. I will just say that we did want to touch base that you do want to make sure that your evidence is credible, and that can always include a mix of statistics, quotations, studies, polls, etc. But it can also be based on like real life examples and personal experience too. But you don't want to overwhelm your case with evidence, and you should always select the best evidence to represent your claims.
Oh, speaking of evidence, I know that in the classroom, you've learned about the CRAP tool being, current, relevant, accurate. authority and purpose. That might be right. So I think like using tools like that from the classroom and using your own personal experiences will help you develop your argument a little bit better than just doing the research and using coming off with like a purpose in mind is really important. But yeah, with that, we just want to say thank you. Thank you, Tradica, for letting us host this session today. Thank you to my great partners that have done a great job and have worked really hard. Thank you to all the attendees here for coming on a Friday afternoon when you probably want to go home. But we're really grateful to have you here, and all the people that are watching this in the future. Thank you for coming in and fully watching it through. And thank you to Ms. Freeman, most of all, for mentoring us through this entire process. But yeah.
Yeah, likewise.
If you have any questions? Yeah.
Thank you so much. These sessions I hope you guys see some of the upcoming ones as well. I know next Friday, I believe there will be one centered around a playbook for food waste. And there will also be one this upcoming Tuesday that focuses on a gender lens with climate action policy. So you guys have that to look forward to. You guys should definitely check those out. But I'd just like to add that, thank you to Sydney, my debate partner, because it was definitely about building confidence in each other. And most importantly, debate is also about having fun. There's definitely times when in preparation, we would debate each other and just have a good laugh about it, when maybe we would try to make up something on the spot when we couldn't necessarily defend our argument. But that's what it's all about, preparing for it. And it can really just translate into real life world skills applicable to the SDGs. And so Sydney, I'll leave you with any closing remarks and we can move to a Q&A.
Yeah, I just want to say we really hope you learned from this session some of the skills that you'll use further down in the line to understand your own arguments and your own points of view on any subject, not just the SDGs. So yeah, thank you for attending our session. Do you guys have any questions for us?
And feel free to unmute.
First, oh my God, thank you, right? I think I have like a whole list of questions, and Sophia, Chris, I think you know us well enough to let you know that we wouldn't let you off the hook without questions. So get ready. Sydney, thank you too. Should we move ahead, you guys?
So I like heard you talked about how there's like free periods where you can like think like after like you saying your claim or something. Like you said, like it depends on like how long you have. What are like the factors that like affect how long you have like for your break or whatever?
Okay, so I think you might be referring to prep time. So prep time again is 2 minutes that is shared between the teams. You cannot take prep time before your speeches. You cannot take prep time in the middle of a speech. That would kind of disrupt the flow of the conversation, which is why you can take it after any argument. So really what happens is after, let's say I finish my crossfire and maybe I don't know how to respond to something they pointed out and we need to rebuild our case. I want to take prep time. So maybe I might say to the judge, hey, I want to take 30 seconds prep time. Everything is always going to be set by a timer by a judge. They always have a strict timer. So usually you have to wrap up your statement. Like let's say you have your 4-minute opening speech. When that timer goes off, you have to wrap up your final statement. So prep time is separate. It's really used to, to go back with your partner to build up anything. And so if you use 30 seconds, that means the other team also loses 30 seconds. So that means you guys both have only 1:30 of prep time left to use. Does that answer your question?
And to build off that question, when would you recommend using that prep time?
Yeah, so typically you wouldn't start off a debate with prep time because that you don't even know what the other contentions are. but you probably want to use it after in a time where maybe you weren't able to refute something well. You need time to find evidence. Maybe you couldn't recall it on the spot. You might want to use it before going into, excuse me, a crossfire. There are a total of 3 crossfires. Speaker one is going to, the speaker ones of each team are going to have a crossfire after they list their contentions. So they're going to talk about, why maybe this contention, contradicts maybe something they said, or how there are, or whatever argument defeats that. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice. There's also another crossfire for the rebuttals. I would think that Sydney and I can get your thoughts on this, that you might want to use it later towards the debate where a lot of things are in the air, a lot of things you're saying on the spot. You might get sometimes with hearing so many things they're saying, you need to kind of collect your thoughts. And so I would always advise you use that, before a crossfire or after a crossfire. And again, there is slightly a strategy to it. If you're left over with prep time and you're con and you haven't used all of it and you're at your final focus, pro can't use that anymore. You guys share the prep time. Let's say no one used prep time, which we would always say use it. Then use those complete 2 minutes, talk with your partner, and give a really good last final speech and final focus. Sydney?
Yeah, definitely what Sophia said. And using it before a crossfire might be good. Also, using it before your summary speeches and your final focus speeches. I know those are definitely common places where teams use prep time to sort of synthesize what they want to say and compile all the information that they want to mention during these speeches, because I know these speeches really touch on what occurred during the debate and aren't scripted, aren't written out beforehand. So using prep time beforehand to create those speeches and sort of outline what you want to say would be really useful.
Adding on to what Callum said, if you're using prep time and you use up most of your time, so like if you ask for a certain amount of prep time and then you run out of it, can you ask them for more, or do you have to wait for the next time?
So it is a set 2 minutes. The judge will tell you that 2 minutes are up if you go past that. Some might say, oh, we only need 30 seconds, and they'll stick to that, but some might say, can you start prep time? And if you're the opposing team and the other team says, I want to take prep time, you also have to take prep time. There's no choice. You guys take it together. And so always take the initiative to take it before your partner uses it up in a time maybe you don't want it to be used. So it's a strict 2 minutes. Timing is really important. Anything over could lead to losing points or disqualification in debate competition.
You said,
sorry, I have a question on how like the judging goes. Is there like a scoring rubric, or how's it determined who wins and who loses?
Yeah, so the scoring is, I don't think it's based on a rubric per se, but you have to include a reason why you think the other why you think one team did better than the other. So for example, you might mention a point that they made and how they developed it really well throughout, and how the reasoning was very solid throughout. And you might mention that, oh, maybe the other team didn't really respond well to like their questioning or anything. So it's not really a rubric. It's more based on like sort of your own the points that you personally thought were good during the debate. And there is a scoring system, like a point system, but it's not based on like a rubric per se. So
rather it kind of characterizes how the judges felt. Really, as a judge, you don't want to be left with questions. As the debaters, you want to provide a clear explanation from your claim to your warrant, evidence, and impact as we laid out. That structure is is fundamental, and it'll be the groundwork to every single one of your contentions. And so just with what Sydney said, when you're in a debate, if you don't point out that something the opposing sides was false, or you have something to, rebuttal that with, then it will be regarded as true, and it'll just give leverage to the other team. Always speak up in a debate. That's kind of the point between the public speaking between it, and to challenge your opponent, successfully, and to do it effectively by supporting that with evidence. So, yeah.
Thank you.
And then
Austin, did you say, was there something you wanted to add?
Oh, Miss Raymond, you're on mute, so we didn't hear anything.
I was asking Austin a question, who said that he had a question, but that Sophia had just answered what it was, because we're on our end, we're getting ready to close down because our club time here ends at 4:30. But for the people who are still on with us, who's that, like Callum, Chris, and I, and to all you guys in the room, anybody want to add really quickly before you take off? How would we use this in a real life context with the SDGs?
Or we could, so we could,
Go loud. No, they probably can't hear you.
well, I put it into the chat, but like it helps you with the debate skills. It's easier to think off the spot and think of like different like ways you can solve different like problems.
Yeah, I think one of the incredible things I heard was that if I understood this correctly, if you don't refute a point, that the point is taken as true. Is that correct? And there's just so much disinformation in our daily lives, right? And particularly around the, any of the issues related to the SDGs. I thought that was a big point. If I could get just one more quick question, and go ahead, Austin.
I was gonna say, debate is also built up on strategy, because you want to strike more at their weak points instead of their stronger points that they made. That might be either somewhat factual, and that could easily break down your own claim.
Did you guys hear that okay?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that statement, and that there are definitely going to be spots.
I'm sorry, you can't, of course, hear us.
There are definitely going to be spots where you recognize that your debate, or the opposition isn't making, but also just to keep in mind that you don't have to, some of the points might not necessarily something you guys disagree in. You guys can find compromise on some certain aspects, but ultimately what I find it comes down to, and Sydney can speak on this, or maybe when Chris, like when you're researching two separate topics for anything, that it really comes down to the impact, the explanation, and kind of where you think something is stemming from and how that will solve the root of the issue. And that goes into systems thinking. And I know we went into that briefly, but I know that's something we should use all the time in the classroom to thinking about the SDGs. It'll definitely just bolster your argument through the roof and impress the judge.
Thank you, Sophia. I think, Callum, do you have anything you might want to add? And just another real quick question. You did say that you could provide the other team might ask for evidence. And so and that goes to all about we're citing research sources here. When do they take the time to read it, or how is that really, they just want to see the proof?
I think usually since everything has been now virtual, Sydney, they would like drop like the website link into chat. I think when it was now, well, in a virtual setting, they would look at the website because now you can more easily have access on the spot to new information. You can use new evidence, you can't make a new argument. So I would say that when it was in person, since we had like our original papers, and when you create that pre-written speech, we would source everything correctly. And so I think we would make maybe a works cited, and they could refer to that after the speech was over. I don't think we'd allocate within like a crossfire, can you show me that? And because that would just take time away from the debate. So something they'd look at afterwards for credibility.
I have a question. So you said they went virtual, like the meetings and the debates. How would prep time work if like would they put them the two teams in breakout rooms so they can like discuss like independently?
So when it was, and it is still virtual, what they would do is, so there'd be 5 people in the Zoom room. It'd be the 2 people on pro, 2 people on con, and the judge. And what would happen is if one of the teams wanted to take prep time, everyone would mute themselves, and most likely they would call each other on a separate device to talk with their partner, because we didn't have like Zoom permissions, I think, to do breakout rooms. And it was just mostly, your debate partner. And so you should have like contact information to be able to contact with them, which was probably an advantage now thinking about it, doing it virtually, to probably always be able to talk to your partner throughout the entire debate. So there's probably more advantages to doing it virtually, whereas when you're there in person, you don't have at the tip of your fingers new evidence and new research. It's something you come into the next debate with usually.
All right, thank you.
Yep, no problem.
I think we have gotten all the questions that we could squeeze in. I just want to say thank you. I'm sure Marcos and Callum and Che, who are still here with us, would say the same. Agree. Yeah. I think I should always say thank you, Radhika. Thank you, Jasmine, for providing us with these incredible opportunities, and for Sophia, Chris, Sydney, and Hannah chiming in the chat. Thank you so much, because every single thing that you guys talked about are all the rudimentary skills that kids are learning. As soon as you say the claim more evidence and impact, I'm thinking, oh, that's the 5-paragraph essay, when you're in elementary, right? Except that now you're sharing with us how to make that thinking more sophisticated and applying it to the SDGs. So I thank you for that. I'm sure, one of the things we were saying when we were off mic, and then when I jumped on mic, was we need to practice our public speaking. And one of the forums is exactly this for us. And it occurred to me, I know one of the things that Radhika is probably always valuable to you as the person who's really the hub of all of the eco ambassadors globally, is if, I don't know, maybe you guys could like break that down into like a couple lessons, because I know we'd love to see you back here with us, and then potentially to engage in a debate with you in some way with some of the SDGs, which I think would just sharpen all of our thinking all together. And then it strikes me like, oh, Radhika, and as an eco ambassador, cross debate globally. I think that would be interesting, because it's all friendly debate, right? And I think that's one of the things that I also really appreciated, that you may call them the opposition, but it's not that way at all.
Yeah, I think I found that when we were in person, at the end of a really intense debate, we would all end up laughing it off, because it can just feel so intense in the moment, and then we're all finally done, and it's just a good time, really.
I really like the idea, Ms. Freeman, on doing this global debate, because I think people will bring different perspectives, and I think all the points that we learned today, one thing that I was reflecting on is that this is really including everyone and being inclusive in the debate, inclusive of all the points and acknowledging and trying to debate with all the things is global citizenship, because we are not saying you're wrong with no facts, but we are kind of debating and trying to come to a consensus. So it is actually SDG 4.7, and I think debating skills brings us together and is a way of coming to a conclusion, but in a really systematic way with all the facts. So I think I really learned a lot today from all the tips, and definitely this video will be really helpful for our other eco ambassadors to learn from this. And I would definitely take up that global debate challenge, and I think maybe next time round we should have a debating session as we go along. So thanks for the fantastic idea, and thanks for the fantastic panel. Superb.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
Me too. Great. Jasmine, anything you want to share before we close?
Oh, nothing. It's always such an honor to listen to all the great ideas. I do love the like doing a follow-up and turning into a lesson. I think it's going to help out a lot of people. I am personally very shy, so for me debate is like a big no-no. But at least in the public sense, I'm very shy. But yes, I learned a lot, and thank you so much for such a good presentation.
Oh yeah, I'm really sorry. I forgot to mention you in the acknowledgments and then, but thank you also for letting us host this. Yeah, I couldn't see everyone on my screen. I just saw like Sophia and like two other people. So I'm sorry about that. But yeah, you've done a lot for us.
Don't worry. Thank you so much.
Thank you.